Welcome to Climate Changed, a podcast from the BTS Center. I'm Ophelia Hu Kinney, the BTS Center's Strategic Communications Director.
I'm Nicole Diroff, Associate Director at the BTS Center.
And I'm Peterson Toscano, producer of the Climate Changed podcast.
On Climate Changed, we ask our guests and we ask ourselves what it means to live, to love, and to lead in a climate-changed world. This season, we spoke with organizers, spiritual leaders, climate professionals, and wisdom keepers about imagination, grief, ancestors, speculative futures, and the sacred work of becoming people who can live faithfully in this time.
And today, we are closing season 4 with a reflection episode, and I'm dog sitting, so I might have an extra special guest with us. We'll see. We will listen back to some of the voices who shaped the season. We'll hear from listeners. We got lots of voicemails, and offer some of our own takeaways. What surprised us, what unsettled us, what changed how we think, how we work, or how we move through this climate change world.
And it's absolutely fine if you haven't heard any or all of season 4 yet. And we hope this episode can actually be like a doorway into the season. So you'll hear the themes and the questions and some of the voices that made this season so rich.
And Ophelia, this is your first time guest hosting on Climate Change. Listeners know Nicole, and they've heard me popping in and out as producer, and you've come in the middle with a little announcement, but you are new to this podcast microphone family. Mm-hmm. So before we go any further, we need to properly welcome you.
Oh, thank you.
Welcome to you, Ophelia. You joined the BTS Center as Strategic Communications Director in September of 2025, but you already had a history with this organization before joining our staff team.
Yeah, I sometimes say that I get closer and closer in the orbit, and now I get to be in the center of where things are happening. Before I was on staff, I got to serve on the BTS Center's Board of Trustees. And before that, I was a grateful participant and I got to contribute to Leadership Commons. I joke that I had probably the best reason to not finish my board term, which was to take on this role.
And crucially, for this episode, you were already listening to climate change before much of that happened.
Absolutely. Huge fan.
Which makes you pretty much the perfect person to join Peterson and me in reflecting on season 4. You have the perspective of someone who knows the inner life and inner workings of the BTS Center, but also someone who encountered this podcast first as a listener.
And for listeners who are meeting Ophelia for the first time, Ophelia, as she said, is the BTS Center's Strategic Communications Director, a position I was rooting for a long time. She's also the child of immigrants and lives in Scarborough, Maine with her wife and daughter. Her family of origin strictly adheres to disorganized religion, but she took what she calls a more scandalous route of Christian curiosity. I love that.
I love that too. Before joining the BTS Center staff, Ophelia served as Director of Communications for Reconciling Ministries Network, an organization working for the full participation of LGBTQ+ people in the life and leadership of the United Methodist Church.
And one through line of Ophelia's work and writing is the provocation of spiritual imagination. I love that phrase. I'm going to say it again. The provocation of spiritual imagination. She is part of Hope Gateway in Portland, Maine, and has served on the boards of the Equality Community Center and the Chinese American Friendship Association of Maine. She's a graduate of Amherst College and the Yale School of Management.
That phrase that you just repeated, Peterson, the provocation of spiritual imagination, fits really well with this season 4. So, Ophelia, when you think about world building and the themes we covered in season 4, what drew you in?
Well, the easy answer would be to say everything. A more nuanced answer might be that the season really gave me a chance to see that world building takes so many different kinds of skill sets and passions. And there are some world builders who will build bridges. There are some who will be holy detonators. There are some who will get to excavate things that we weren't expecting to uncover. So the provocation of spiritual imagination is, I think, an invitation that really weaves itself through this entire season. There's kind of this beckoning of each guest, and Nicole, you and Autumn, and Peterson, through your producing too, this sense of, come on in. You are also a part of this conversation. You have a place at this world building expo.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great way to enter this conversation with that invitation. So let's begin like we always do in the show. Let's ground ourselves in the season itself.
Yeah, each episode of Climate Change begins with a grounding. And for this season ending reflection episode, our grounding is going to be a chorus of voices from season 4.
You are about to hear Katie Mears, Norma Wong, Tory Stevens, Autumn Brown, Rabbi Ora Nick Kincainer, and Francis Weller. These clips come from the extended season 4 montage we shared with the BTS Center board. And I'm going to play it for you right now, uninterrupted. You'll just hear their voices.
And as you listen, notice what rises up in you, whether that's a phrase or a question. Maybe it's a memory or a resistance. Is there a longing? I invite you to let these voices bring us back into the world of this season.
Here are the voices from season 4 of Climate Change.
In our faith communities, when we've talked about climate, we often call it eco-justice in the Episcopal world. We're usually talking about what in climate world we would call mitigation activities. Putting solar panels on, we're adding an EV charger, we're putting more insulation, like that kind of things to lessen the amount of carbon that's being emitted. We're not usually having adaptation conversations. Even if we stopped emitting tomorrow, the world is still different in ways that we need to figure out how to adjust to. At our best, church is a great space for imagination, moral imagination.
A world that is heating up is not that much different than the end of the last ice age. Our adaptation and our not adding to the world's suffering is called upon, or we all perish together. It's going to cause an entire reconfiguring of all things. Consciousness will need to precede the doingness, and the doingness will have to be done differently. That's what's going to need to change. That's what's going to need to change. It's going to have to break all of our theories of how things are supposed to be.
Speculative fiction opens up a lot of opportunity for us to dream about the futures that we want, as opposed to the things that we don't want. What I started to notice after managing this project is that in kind of being at Grist and reading the news every day around what's going on in the world, is that there's a lot of like what we don't want like institutions to do or what we don't want in life, but there's less of what we want to choose. What's the world that we want if we had power and control and like, through democratic means, but like if the people I have to put that in there.
Democratically, we have control.
I have to put that in there because of where we are right now.
Truly.
Speculative fiction allows people to dream and imagine and create. We in the climate space need more of that.
People are hungry, increasingly, like surprisingly hungry for connections to spirituality, for connections to culture, their own culture before it was erased or whitewashed or eaten by capitalism. People are hungry for connections to ancestors and for connection to the more than human world, to trees, to earth, to water, to air, to animals.
That's where the responsibility of our spiritual leaders, I think, really comes to the fore, because folks who are holding spiritual leadership roles on Earth right now are among the few people who can cultivate the ground for the experience that people are longing for and actually require in order to face this time.
The trouble there is that frequently those same religious leaders, and I've worked with a lot of them, are not getting the support they need. They take on an identity, on a role that basically precludes them from asking for what they need. So they become chronic holders for others, and then they burn out, or it becomes too much over time. They're carrying their congregants' grief, their personal familial grief, cultural grief. They're carrying so much, but they're the ones who are supposed to be holding everybody else.
Wow. Let's take a breath after that. Breathe in and breathe out. There is so much in these voices: imagination, adaptation, ancestors, grief, spiritual leadership, and the real honest need for support.
And that was really the season. I mean, Autumn Brown, who has been our special co-host for the season, she has this ability to draw out the guests, and she went deep with them. The guests themselves asked us not only to imagine different futures, but literally to become different kinds of people in the present.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to notice also who's already doing that work of world building, whether that's in congregations or disaster response or in the arts, in rituals or in grief work. There's organizing and storytelling, and also in our everyday relationships with the more than human world.
Before we move into our reflections, we want to bring in a listener voice. This is Fritz from Portland, Maine.
I've been listening to the Climate Change podcast since its inception. So often, conversations about the climate crisis veer between despair, magical thinking, and denial. In Climate Change, I experienced conversations with a clear-eyed perspective and a recognition that we are in this together in our faith communities and in community with the more than human world. I especially appreciate beginning each podcast with the grounding exercise and closing it with an invitation to something we can do. Thank you.
Fritz names something that matters so much to me: clear-eyed perspective. Not despair, not denial, not magical thinking, but honesty as hopefulness.
Yeah. I also love that Fritz noticed the structure of the show, which I also have loved for a long time, that there's a grounding at the beginning and then there are next steps at the end. And that's kind of the spiritual practice and the keeping of the hours in this podcast. We ground and then we listen and we reflect. And I also really love that there's an element of let's turn around and have this other conversation that isn't just this intimate enclosure of the guest and the host. And then we get to ask, what now? What can we do?
Yeah. And today, as we reflect on the season, we are also asking, what has listening done to us?
So for this main section, as we've been talking about podcast structure, we are now in the main section. We were thinking we would each offer a reflection on season 4. We're not trying to summarize every episode. Instead, we've been asking one another, what stayed with you? What changed each of us? And what do we think about differently now?
And after Nicole, Ophelia, and I record these reflections, I'm going to weave in a few guest clips from the season. So you may hear voices from season 4 appear inside this section as part of the conversation.
Okay, let's start with my reflection and then Peterson and then Nicole.
Okay, Ophelia, you listen to all of our episodes before they air and have the job of deciding how we want to introduce them to our community. So as you listened and thought about what might be most relevant, what might be most provocative, I wonder, what would you share with us that rose to the surface for you?
With each episode, I wanted to say, okay, I know I just said this last episode is the best, but hear me out. This one is also the best. So much of it is like, I want people to sink down. And I guess I'm using the language that Francis Weller uses now in that episode that he did with us, to go deep and to allow their pulse to lower, their blood pressure to sink a little, and to set themselves in the soul of their questions and the places where their curiosity hooks onto these huge questions about place and love and longing and healing. One of the things that was personally so impactful to me was to hear Rabbi Ora Nick Kincainer talk about the why behind what one of our BTS Center friends, Jack Fless, refers to as like a holy frustration. In my own spiritual life, I can at times feel so paralyzed by the sensation that there is so little that I can do to alleviate suffering, or that I'm watching with my loved ones what feels like kind of an inevitability of suffering, oppression, and things that as one individual I have so little control over. And yet it takes a great amount of spiritual accounting to remain steadfast in this kind of search. And what Rabbi Ora says is essentially that we have this very human need to be with one another through suffering. And I'm not an anthropologist, but if you can imagine a time when our earliest human ancestors lived amongst each other, they had a sense that they grieved together. And they didn't do that in an incredibly long distance. They didn't do that by sending flowers or voicemails or emails. It was so present. The beauty and the pain of such an interconnected world right now is the immediacy that we can experience other people's suffering second or third hand, and yet lack the comparable skills to be able to offer what feels like adequate comfort and adequate presence. So Rabbi Ora essentially said we are robbed of our moral agency to offer our presence and to offer comfort. I don't want to say too much of what she says because she says it so well, and I'm going to let her say it in an excerpt.
What are you noticing in your work as a chaplain becomes possible for the folks who are coming to you once they are having the experience of emotional attunement?
Yeah. You said that you're particularly curious about climate feelings. And I love that you call them climate feelings because the phrase that's more commonly used is climate emotions. I think both of those words, both climate or the phrase climate change and emotions, are clinical and sanitized. They're just sort of hard to hold. You named it climate feelings. Yeah, I would call it what? I would call it no. I would call it, oh. It's important to really get down to like the nitty gritty of what are we actually talking about.
You're picking up on like calling it feelings as opposed to something more clinical. What is the thing that's actually happening inside of us, which is maybe below language? It's like,
Yeah. And we know that being able to name what we're experiencing is deeply necessary for us as human beings. When we don't have the ability to name our experience, we can't claim it. It's often hard for us to really fully register that it's happening.
Well, as I'm listening to what you were saying at first about this sinking down, or that part that you were talking about with using Francis Weller's language, it reminded me of Isaac Pennington, who's a very early Quaker, who said, like, sink down into the seed. And for Quakers, I'm a Quaker, and we have all this ideas of what's inside of us. It's the light, it's a seed. He says, sink down into the seed. And this whole season was a whole sinking down. And Rabbi Ora in particular, as I was editing it, I just had to stop a few times. The honesty, the clarity was just breathtaking, but not overwhelming.
Yeah. I am a parent to a younger person. She's 3. And it really struck me that at the time that we were interviewing Rabbi Ora, she had just begun this part of her journey of parenting, that she had a newborn. And the presence of this kind of newer life in the midst of Rabbi Ora's wisdom and her invitation to us to be present, to challenge the ways in which we conceive of our separateness, was particularly profound. It just struck me as particularly profound from somebody who's a parent to a young person to have this new human being, this new life in Rabbi Ora's presence, while she was talking about the misconception of our separateness and our very human, visceral, instinctive longing to offer comfort.
When we don't have the ability to name our experience, we can't claim it. It's often hard for us to really fully register that it's happening. As a chaplain, I'm holding space for folks to name what they're experiencing so that it becomes legible to themselves, so that they can carry it to their loved ones, to their communities, and render it legible for the folks from whom they want comfort or from whom they need care, or folks that they want to organize with or fight alongside. It can be a profoundly validating experience, but I just think of it as just necessary. We need to be witnessed. We need to be seen. We need someone to tell me. We need someone to tell us, you're not alone with this, in order to be present to our own reality.
Well, and this connects beautifully with the voicemail we received from Grace Pugh Hubbard. And Grace responded to this idea of throughtopia. This was from our first episode in the conversation with Tory Stevens.
Hi, Nicole and Peterson. I'm Grace Pugh Hubbard, Climate Care Coordinator for the New England Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church, and I'm an avid listener to the Climate Changed podcast. This through-utopian space, found somewhere between utopia and dystopia, seems pragmatic and hopeful to me as we find ways to work out solutions and pathways toward a more egalitarian and harmonious future. As an artist advocate for social justice, I'm interested in the ways art in its many forms tells not only the stories of our current life together and the stories of our past, but also imagines the future. Futuristic art can be ominous or foreboding, but this idea of through-topia is filled with much possibility and promise. And this idea of looking honestly, with imagination, walking courageously through our fear while imagining and naming solutions for our generations to come gives me hope and joy. Keep up the good work.
I love Grace's phrase, walking courageously through our fear. That feels like one of the core invitations of this whole season.
And it's so different from pretending fear is not there. It's acknowledging the presence of fear and choosing to take a faithful next step.
Which brings us to one of the big questions of the season. What stories are we telling about the future, and what futures become possible because we tell different stories?
Peterson, you have been inside every episode of this season as our illustrious producer. So I'm wondering, what did season 4 do?
Yeah. Okay. And you need to stop me at some point because I have a lot to say. I'm just like bursting. So you can stop me whenever you need to. Yeah, I had a very unusual seat for the whole season. I get to be in the recording sessions when Autumn talks to the guests. So I see that live. Then I edit down those conversations so that Nicole and Autumn can listen, reflect, and respond. Then I join Nicole and Autumn for the recording. After that, I piece it all together and produce 2 versions of the show. And I don't know if everyone knows this, but we have the audio podcast and now a full YouTube video, which more and more people are liking. And it's kind of nice seeing people's faces when they're sharing what they're sharing. For each episode, I also produce at least 8 short clips for you, Ophelia, which you then share with the wider world. I create the show notes, the discussion guide. And so there's a lot that goes on. I'm the most enriched person because of this podcast, because I have been soaking in it all. And I've heard all the words, and some of you only heard part of the words. And we will probably release some bonus material because there was so much good stuff. So all of that means I have the privilege of going deep into these conversations. I live with them and I listen to them again and again and again. And when I ask myself what season 4 did to me, the first thing that comes up is storytelling, which was our first episode. The conversation with Tory Stevens has stayed with me as a writer, a performer, and as someone who's been trying to tell better climate stories since 2014. Tory talked about the storytelling project he organized through Grist, and what struck me was his critique of so much science fiction and climate fiction. I don't know if you remember this, right? He and Autumn pointed out that a lot of futuristic storytelling gives us a culturally flat world.
Yes.
Like everyone's wearing the same uniform. Difference is gone. Religion disappears along with culture, ethnicity, food. It's just kind of this one intergalactic blah.
You know, climate fiction is adjacent to science fiction. So I think science fiction had the problem for a long time. People are so focused on the world building and the other aspects of the story that they forget culture. I don't know where it comes from, to be honest, but I do think that there's an idea that in the future, it would be better. Like I'm speaking for the collective writers out there, or the ethos out there, that it would be better if we lost our culture or something like that, where there's less difference, so there's less problems, and we're more kind of in line. There's this idea that less difference will make it easier for us to be on the same team. And the other part of this is kind of the worlds that people are building. Oftentimes there's a crew or there's a group of people and they're a part of something. And when you're a part of something, you have a uniform. And so your uniform, like your culture is kind of like that space that's being created for the crew or team. But yeah, my advocacy here is that we need to lean into the difference that people have, show that those expressions, from religion to foodways, clothing, music, everything. People's identity needs to be deeper and more layered and more nuanced.
In our storytelling.
Because instead what we're doing is we're focusing a lot on the world building and not on the world building of the individual characters.
The thing that immediately comes to my mind is colonization, or like a colonial way of thinking, as one of the reasons why we would have this orientation to sameness being the thing that produces more peace, right? Star Trek is a great example of this, of a show that has so many themes that I absolutely love. But then you think about the prime directive, if they're still really indigenous, then we don't talk to them. Like, they have to have reached a certain level of non-indigeneity before we'll interact with them. And it's like,
right,
what are we saying?
Yeah.
And it actually reminded me of the way some people described heaven when I was growing up in church, and they were trying to get us excited. Yeah, because it just always sounded like one eternal praise service where everyone loses all of their personality. And even as a kid, I'm like thinking, surely God, who created the tiger lily and the platypus, can come up with something more interesting than that. And that's what I think we need to do with our climate stories. And that's exactly what I heard Tory saying, is that people need something worth longing for, something worth working and fighting for. And that's the job of storytellers like me and all of us. And when I say storytellers, I mean that all of us. Sure, writers, but ministers, listening, activists, artists, teachers, organizers, parents, anyone who helps a community imagine what is possible. And we've heard Rob Hopkins talk about this too, who was also has been part of the BTS universe. He wrote the book From What Is to What If. We need to paint a picture of the future that is so compelling, so textured, so delicious that even people who don't think they care about climate change might say, wait, I want to live in that world. That's the world I want my children and grandchildren to be in. How do we get there? So let's hear a little bit from Tory about this very thing.
Every story that we publish, I think of like these imaginary dials that the writer or author has, where they can turn up climate solutions are up to 80. Grief is maybe dialed up on the emotional level of 30 on that story. And that was like the main vibe that you're getting from this story, even though it is a climate fiction story. But what it led with and what you, the reader, took away with it was, yeah, this is a climate fiction story, but this is a story that's so much more than that. It's about grief. I was really stuck on looking at all the stories as to kind of what is the emotional piece here. Like if I had to say this story was like the base level is joy. This one, the base level is death or grief or extreme kind of family feeling. A climate fiction story doesn't always have to be dialed up to 100 around everything you're doing with the climate. I see people try to make these stories that are like so climate focused in every facet with every doodad in their kitchen, and they lose the character and they lose the base emotion that they're trying to communicate or relate with people to. I often say sometimes like a good climate fiction story is, it's rare that it's dialed up to 80, where it has all these different things buzzing around fixing things and climate forward, and more it's about the character moving through life and being themselves, and there's some climate fiction in the story.
So that part about story needing to be story first really challenged me. Tory said a climate fiction story does not have to have every climate solution dialed up to 100.
Right.
You don't have to scare the snot out of everybody. Sometimes the base note is grief. It could be joy. It could be family. It could be intergenerational listening. And that really struck me. And so no surprise, after that recording session with Tory's voice in my head, I went to Quaker Meeting for Worship, holding a desire to write a climate story that did that. Not like a lecture or talk gussied up in drag as a story or a list of solutions with characters pasted on top, but a real story, one that moves people, that lets people feel the future. And I came up with this story called Birth Pangs that I shared with both of you at Christmas time.
Yes. Yeah.
And I was just so pleased to be able to create a world. And I don't know if it's a fully successful story. I'm still working on it, but that definitely inspired me and got me to do something. My second big takeaway, and it's been a big one, really changed the way I see myself. It came through Nora Wong and this question of being a good ancestor. Norma spoke about indigeneity in a way that I had never considered before. And she made a distinction between cultural identity and something deeper, a source way. She talked about a source way, a way of being in relationship with land, ancestors, community, with the more than human life. And that got me thinking, even as she was speaking about my own ancestors. My grandparents immigrated from Italy, and because of World War II and because the need for them to assimilate, my family got cut off from most of our ties to Italy. And that included language, many of the customs. Thank God we still have the food. That's the one thing. But after hearing Norma, I found myself getting curious about my people. Who were my people? What did they know? What mattered to them? What wisdom did they carry before Christianity, before modernity, before all the forces that separated so many of us from land and place and season? Now, I want to be careful here. I am not claiming an indigenous identity. That would not be honest, and it would not be appropriate. But what I heard, and maybe you can confirm this, but what I heard from Norma and also from Francis Weller later in the season is that those of us who have been separated from older ways can still become curious. We can listen, learn to belong more deeply to the places where we live. We can recover these practices of attention without pretending to be someone we're not.
Yeah.
Did you hear that, or am I making this up?
I heard that. Yeah. I hear a careful distinction between personal and cultural identity and the affirmation that that you belong, that you are of the earth and you are specifically of a place. And there's an invitation, I think, in what you're saying, Peterson, and in Norma's instructions to us, that we not lose that connection to place, and we don't lose that curiosity for the soils that we find ourselves in.
And it hits me at a very particular time in my life because I'm married to a South African, and this year we're moving to South Africa.
Yeah.
And when you go to South Africa, ancestors are very important to people. People talk about their ancestors all the time. Now, it is not my birthplace or the origin of my people, but this season has made me want to arrive differently. Like, just be more awake and willing to learn. the land, the season, the people, histories, the wounds, and the beauty. And it also makes me look at Sunbury, Pennsylvania, where I currently live. It makes me look at it differently. Like, what does it mean to belong to this place, to know the Susquehanna River, certain trees I pass every day, the people here in a very politically conservative area where people care about many of the same things I do, but for different reasons. And the history here and the harm that was done to this place because of extractive practices with coal, the coal industry that gave so much and then took so much. And what does it mean to stop being a lone ranger and start living as part of a collective? And as a white man in America, we're trained to be self-reliant, to not even talk to people in public. You just see another man, you just nod, and then you just walk on. So it really opened me up to say, how can I be more part of the community? Francis Weller, who I just spent so much time with because it was the last episode. Oh my gosh. He brought something else forward for me. Francis talked about spiritual leaders carrying so much grief for others and often not having the support they need. And I felt that when he said it. He wasn't just saying that, he was feeling that. And I hope spiritual leaders who are listening felt seen and affirmed. I know I felt seen by it. And I don't consider myself a spiritual leader or a minister, but I have done a lot of that kind of work locally in my Quaker meeting in this rural city of Sunbury. And I know what it's like to carry concern for a community, what it's like to try to hold people together when things are tense or frightening or uncertain. So what this season kept reminding me is that we desperately need each other. And not in some sentimental, sweet way, but like survival. And I'm convinced more than ever that, our species has gone to war against nature. Not every individual, but as a species, we've been trained into separation from the earth, from other species, from our neighbors, from our ancestors, even from ourselves. And the repair will require love and friendship, something that Francis mentions towards the end, and not only with other humans, but with all living things.
Religious leaders, and I've worked with a lot of them, are not getting the support they need. They take on an identity, on a role that basically precludes them from asking for what they need. So they become chronic holders for others, and then they burn out, or they get, it becomes too much over time. They're carrying their congregants' grief, their personal familial grief, cultural grief. They're carrying so much, but they're the ones who are supposed to be holding everybody. The most important thing is friendship. I don't think there is maturation outside of friendship. We don't even know most of the times that we're in strategy and in survival modes and in the complex. But our friends can notice us change. Our friends can give us reflections and say, hey, what's going on with you today? You're very quiet, or I can't feel you today. And those are precious, precious people in our world that we trust. Like you say, you generated a quality of trust in people because you're able to see into where somebody is. When we're in those states, we don't know we're in those states else.
And then finally, I have to say how much I enjoyed listening to you, Nicole, and Autumn together. This was risky. You didn't know each other before this season, and it gave you a chance to get to know each other on the microphone, to develop a relationship in real time, to listen to the guest, yes, but also to listen to each other. And you processed such deep things in real time, and you shared wisdom, humor, and vulnerability. Nicole, there was a moment in that conversation after Norma's episode when you talked about making a public apology to John Bear Mitchell. That was powerful. It was a sacred moment in this podcast. And I love the way that Autumn just slowed down. She didn't rush past it. She invited you to notice what was happening in your body, what feelings were there, what it took to make that kind of repair in public. Let's just listen to that for a moment.
He did do a public apology actually to Sherry Mitchell's brother, John Bear Mitchell, at an event that we hosted. He and I spoke before I did this. I didn't do it as a surprise. with him, but several religious leaders in Maine had been going through a program called Decolonizing Faith with a Wabanaki organization here, coming into real awareness of the centrality of this faith tradition that I am a leader of.
The centrality of this faith tradition to colonization. Mm-hmm.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. When I walk around with an ordained title, there's a history that goes with that tradition that did real violence. So that was a super vulnerable act. And I felt like I didn't know how to do a public conversation with John Bear Mitchell without starting with the fact that I needed to offer some level of a public confession as I was becoming more and more aware of what those roots meant. It feels so small, it feels so small in the grand scheme of things, but it was for me a moment to model for the religious leaders in the room that maybe sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is to own that religious leadership identity and say, I'm aware, I'm sorry. There's a Christian practice of confession. I mean, that's actually a thing that our tradition could maybe help guide us with, and maybe we need to activate it a lot more.
I mean, it's interesting, Nicole, because there's so much talk these days about accountability, right? And one of the things that I've really learned over years of doing social justice and movement work, working with communities, is that accountability does not happen outside of relationship. You can't hold someone accountable that you're not in a relationship with, and you can't be accountable to someone that you're not in a relationship with, right?
Yeah.
And when we're saying accountability, apology is a part of that. It's a deep part of that, right? The ability to actually genuinely acknowledge harm, not just acknowledge the harm, but acknowledge I understand the impact, what the impact has been, or to the extent that I can, I'm going to name the impact, right? And that is a key part of accountability. I appreciate you naming that it feels small. I think that because accountability is a term that gets weaponized a lot right now, it's become such a buzzword in community. I think it's become hard, or maybe it's easy for us to lose sight of how powerful it can be when it's done in relationship. When it's done in relationship, the accountability and the apology is paving the way for the other thing that Norma Wong was really talking about in the interview. It paves the way for accompaniment. It paves the way for, I'm gotta look up the word that she used. The kako, us more than two, as the antidote to individualism. It's accountability and apology and repair that makes the way for us more than two as a part of how we actually orient going forward. Like, we can't do that unless we've actually really sat together in the grief and the heartache and the heartbreak. Our shared history includes this violence. And what do we know about time? Time's a construct, which means that violence isn't in the past.
Right. Exactly.
It's not in the past, right?
Exactly.
And so we have to be able to sit with it and grieve it together.
As a producer, those are the moments I listen for. Not because they're super dramatic, but because they're just so real. Yeah. It wasn't scripted, right? It wasn't prepared. Something happened there between the two of you. Trust was being built, and it led to a deeper kind of conversation. And that has been one of the many gifts of the season for me, watching Autumn and you build that trust. Nicole, you bring so much depth and steadiness and pastoral wisdom. And Autumn is a powerhouse. She brings experience, clarity, and spiritual fire. And I'm super excited about her book when it comes out. All right. So to sum it all up, big talker. So what does season 4 do to me? It made me want to tell better stories. It made me want to become a better ancestor. It made me want to pay attention, closer attention to place. And it reminded me that the work ahead is not just technical and it's not just political. It is relational, imaginative, and spiritual. And maybe most of all, it reminded me that we need stories that help us want to live differently. coming up in the next episode of Climate Change.
Peterson, what a gift. I'm moved by everything that you just shared, the way in which this podcast has touched you and changed you. And now, a look ahead.
Yes, there will be a season 5 of Climate Change. Woohoo! Thank you for listening to Climate Change, a podcast from the BTS Center.
The BTS Center is located in beautiful Portland, Maine. We offer programs and resources for spiritual leaders, faith communities, and all who are seeking to live with courage, compassion, and imagination in a climate-changed world.
You can find transcripts, discussion guides, full-length video episodes, short videos, and bonus material through the BTS Center's website and our YouTube page.
Climate Change is produced by me, Peterson Toscano. Our season 4 hosts were Autumn Brown and Nicole Diroff.
Many thanks to our wonderful guests this season: Tory Stevens, Katie Mears, Norma Wong, Rabbi Ora Nitkin-Kaner, Francis Weller, and others whose voices helped shape a season of world building. Stay connected, share this episode, and reach out anytime. You can email us podcast@thebtscenter.org. We really do love hearing from you. Now, as we close this episode, we turn to the words associated with Julian of Norwich, the 14th century English mystic who lived through plague, upheaval, and deep uncertainty.
Julian wrote, "All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well."